G'day, we're in Des Smith's den. Now, Des Smith lives in Fitzroy in South Australia, and it's interesting that it's named after the very person who gave us the break of gauge, Governor-General Fitzroy. Now, Des has been with the Australian rail industry for decades, and he joined the Commonwealth Railways in the mid-1950s on the construction of the centred gauge railway to Maree. He then was involved with the Trans-Australian Railway, and he had a particular involvement with concrete sleepers, of which I'm sure he'll tell us about. And then he was in charge of the construction of the Tarcoola to Alice Springs Railway. So I don't want to say any more. I think if we ask Des to say a few words. Over to you, Des.
Okay, John. It was 44 years in railway engineering, and I was associated with the North-South Railway for probably 30 years, one way and another. We started first on Stirling North to Maree, which was then part of the track to Alice Springs. Then in 1970, I started on the Tarcoola to Alice Springs planning, survey and design and its construction. Finished in 1980. Just after that, I started the same thing on the Alice Springs Darwin survey and planning. We were damn near ready to build that, but Fraser was mad keen on the railway being built, but called an early election and lost. Bob Hawke had said he would continue the work, but they pulled out. So the Hawke-Keating government stopped the whole thing, and it didn't start again for another 10 years.
Looking through your book, I should say that this little book you've published, and it's going into the libraries, in the State Library and the National Library. You've got some delightful stories here, and there's one here that says a bad year at Anna Creek.
Yes, well, Anna Creek was just a small gang settlement on the Central Australia Railway north of William Creek, and there were only about 5 men in the gang, which was the total population of the place, of course. But in 1 year there were 4 fatalities there, which even for the old narrow gauge railway was unusual. The first was that when the gang came home from work and found the cook hanging under the bridge. Something that nobody knows exactly why, of course. Not long after that, there was a train stopped in the night near Anna Creek, and a guard walked up the train. In those days there was no radio. He walked up along the train in the dark, tripped over a bridge abutment and fell down and was killed, just by a simple fall. Then what happened next? The next one was interesting. The gang had taken a weekend to go to William Creek for grog, which they did, took a lot home with them, and it was a weekend, of course. The ganger in the middle of the night decided he wanted some food, so he told the kitchen to give them something to eat. He called the cook. The cook said he was employed to do 3 meals a day, and that was it. If they wanted more, they could get it themselves. The ganger then thumped the cook a couple of times, and one of the fettlers went out to his room and came back with a .303 and shot the ganger twice from across the width of the little room. It turned out, I think there was 6 or 7 there then. Every one of them was what they call known to police. I think the sentence was 7 years. The last episode, I think the last incident, was when a windstorm buckled the big windmill wheel that was used to pump water from the well at Anna Creek. A fitter was sent out from Port Augusta to dismantle it. He went up the tower with oxy gear to cut sections off and let them fall. But he didn't do it symmetrically, and it had a bit extra weight on one side and suddenly turned and knocked him off the platform at the top of the stand. He died from that fall. So a camp with a population, normal population of about 5, was the scene of 4 fatalities in one year.
Now, Des, I particularly like the story about getting the eggs to the dining car.
I like it better about flattening 2 inspectors of police.
Right.
That was in 1963, when the gang was stranded on a little washaway at William Creek and had a broken drawbar. I went up to Maree. There was quite a lot of damage to the track at the time, north of Maree, and the gang had nowhere to go anyway. There was water over the track behind it and in front of it. I went up in a section car to check out the damage and to fix the gan, while my men started working from Maree northwards, repairing the washaways. I travelled in a section car, and we had a lot of obstacles to go past. A place where the track was swinging in a deep sag. And we had the section car. I had on the back a trolley loaded with 40 loaves of bread, 30 dozen eggs, a big fitters toolbox, a spare drawbar for the locomotive. And that was enough anyway. It was heavy. We finally got to William Creek. We travelled all half the day and all night. Got to William Creek just on daybreak, and I expected the train to be protected with detonators on the track behind. So about a kilometre or so from William Creek, I stood on the side of the section car to warn the others that might be a bang under the front wheel, not to be too startled. I had picked up 2 inspectors of police who were floodbound at Beresford and offered them a lift to William Creek. They were very useful. They helped us pushing the car uphill to get us started. As we approached William Creek, actually, I didn't run over a detonator. Before that, suddenly, bang, we were off the track. It happened that the gang had been out there, a shovel had fallen off their section car and lay with its blade on the rail as a perfect derailleur. And off we went. The car went off at right angles, the trailer ran up into a jackknife. Everybody fell off the section car. I was already off because I'd been standing up. No, the trolley was still on the track. Everybody else was on the ground. I had 2 inspectors of police flat on their back, which is unusual. And we walked the last kilometre or so, pushing the load to William Creek, and all the 30 dozen eggs survived. There was nothing damaged. In fact, I had breakfast in the dining car later on.
And in chapter 6, we look at the early proposals for a north-south railway, and these can be dated back to 1858, which was before there had been any exploration from north-south and back again, and it was in 1861 that John McDouall Stewart successfully went from the south to the north and back again. Now, there were proposals to build this railway using capital from England, against which they would be granted a substantial amount of land, which would be on either side of the railway. It was called a land grant railway. And the South Australian government passed legislation to enable this, but there was never any serious proposal or interest from England with the money, but South Australia wouldn't let go of it. And it tarnished the thinking of the Parliament for decades thereafter. And that was the curse. The curse was that South Australia believed that it had a birthright to build this railway, but in the end they couldn't afford it. And that's when it got to Oodnadatta in 1891, and they ran out of money, and it stayed there for 40 years. And it was then that the penny dropped that we needed to have a standard gauge railway from south to north, and that was not the route to take it. It was flood prone and a very difficult railway to manage. And so that's where the Tarcoola to Alice Springs Railway came into place. And I believe that that was a remarkable construction because there was nothing else in the world of that magnitude in railway construction at that time. Is that a fair comment, Des?
That's correct, John. At the time it was the biggest railway construction since the Trans-Australian Railway. But the Trans was actually two jobs, it was built from either end.
Mm.
So it was the biggest single operation. I think it was bigger than Alice Springs Darwin too, although that's longer, but it was built by in two separate sections.
Well, the Trans-Australian Railway was built with no ballast to start with, and then they ballasted it, say, each year a little bit by a little bit. The Tarcoola to Alice Springs Railway was built and finished fully ballasted.
Yes, it was built with continuously welded rails and concrete sleepers. It was the second railway in Australia to have concrete sleepers. The first was Port Augusta Whyalla. Tarcoola Alice Springs came next. And the Trans line at the same time was getting concrete sleepers. I had the job of planning and building the track to Alice Springs, starting in 1970 and starting the actual construction in 1975. It took us 5 years to build the railway, which is perhaps slow by other standards, but that's how federal governments work with their budgeting and finance and drip feeding, or carefully doling out their annual money.
Des, can you tell them a bit of a story about the concrete sleepers versus the timber industry and the steel industry?
When we started using concrete, I started planning to use concrete sleepers in about 1970 or a little before. There were lots of opposition from timber interests because, of course, their vested interest in the timber industry and timber sleepers. It even included the CSIRO. And, of course, BHP, the big Australian, was then the steel maker and keen on selling steel sleepers. So we had a lot of opposition to the idea of introducing pre-stressed concrete, and some of it was rather unpleasant. It went on for a while. The timber interests gave up fairly early in the piece, but the steel industry was still gnawing away at it 20 years later.
I've been working on and off with Des for a couple of years on this book, and he's been a valuable resource. And there's a lot of material that appears in the chapters that is taken from Des's experience. And I think that we need to acknowledge his contribution